Today's episode is brought to you by HERdacity. HERdacity is a nonprofit inspiring confidence in women to achieve their professional goals. For resources, networking opportunities, and a strong community of women, visit HERdacity.org to learn more.
Welcome to HERdacious, a podcast for audacious women. A warm summer welcome to you all. This is HERdacious, the podcast for audacious women looking to make some career moves. And HERdacious is there to help you do it. My name's Lorelei, the happy host of this show, and today we're going to be talking all things ERGs. To assist us in this amazing conversation, I have the board chairperson for the Financial Literacy Coalition, a founding member of a Black female investment group, and the DE&I director for the Teacher Retirement System of Texas, Kellie Sauls.
It's great to be here. Thank you, Lorelei, for having me.
It is a pleasure to have you here today. We have a really important conversation ahead of us.
I agree. ERGs are important.
Well, we're going to learn why here in a few. So as we are going to be talking all things ERGs, like what they are, why they exist, how to best utilize them, how to start one. Let's start from the beginning. What is an ERG?
An ERG, basically ERG stands for Employee Resource Group, and it's a group of folks that come together, usually in the workplace, who share some common characteristic. And that could be anything from race and ethnicity to gender to sexual orientation to abilities, physical abilities, disabilities, and so on. And it's a group that provides a safe space for those employees to talk about challenges and barriers, but also to problem solve and even serve as a resource for the organization for which they work. They're just good, safe spaces for people to come together to talk about their common challenges or some things that they want to do to help improve their organization.
Why would a company or a group of folks start a formal ERG in a business?
So historically, marginalized groups see higher unemployment rates than majority, more privileged groups. So since the pandemic, with the remote work environment plus the killing of George Floyd, these phenomenon have shined a light on diverse talent pipelines, right? So how are we recruiting and attracting diverse talent? How are we helping them progress in our organization? How are we retaining them? And companies are becoming increasingly more aware, not only around the recruitment, but especially about how to retain diverse talent. So ERGs help support this retention element, right? So you've got a group of folks that are interested in creating a more inclusive culture where everyone feels like they belong, they have a stake, they've invested in the success of the company or the organization. It supports an environment where people feel like they belong, right? If I'm a part of a group and I'm engaged, I feel like I'm doing something to make things better. So there's a belonging element there that's really important, and that definitely supports retention. And then it provides a resource to support diversity recruitment, right? So if you've got all these folks in this particular ERG that are trying to attract more people to the organization because they're happy, they're helping bring about change, they want to attract more like them to the organization. It helps with recruitment. For the individual members themselves, there are leadership opportunities, right? So you think about in these groups, somebody's got to help organize, set the platform, the mission, implement all of these things. And through these experiences where people have the opportunity to do these things, there's some personal and professional development.
Right.
Might not otherwise have the opportunity to develop. It impacts this opportunity to impact and generate stakeholder engagement. So as I get involved and engage, I reach out to other coworkers and peers in the organization to do the same thing because I'm enjoying myself. I'm feeling like, oh, I'm bringing about change. Let me see if, Susie, the cubicle next to me, wants to do the same thing. And then working closely with senior management. That doesn't happen every day. So ERGs have an opportunity to share, hey, here's what we're learning, here's what we know, here's what we'd like to do about it. And it goes directly to senior management. Typically, ERGs have executive sponsors or they have the ear of someone in a senior leadership role. So it gives them visibility and opportunity to be in front of those folks.
Now, you touched on this previously for just a hot second, but what are the benefits of ERGs to the company or the organization as a whole? Because you mentioned retention previously.
Yeah. So if you add up those elements that I highlighted earlier, at the end of the day, right, you foster a culture that's inclusive, belonging. People are invested in the success of the organization, right? They've got a stake in it.
Which creates a sense of loyalty to the company.
Absolutely. So then you have this institutional, history, right, embedded in the organization. And successful outcomes. So it's a business case for having these ERGs there. Happy people, great work, feeling good about it creates better business outcomes.
And more diverse populations within organizations are better on the bottom line. Like the stats show that.
Absolutely. 100%. Better decision making, more innovative solutions and suggestions, creativity. All of the things that you would love to see in an organization.
Well, give us some of the basics for starting an ERG if your company does kind of need one and it doesn't have one this moment.
Wow. So I always think about the basics. First, if I'm the person thinking about starting an ERG, I want to start with myself, right? Do I think I can take this on? What might be the time commitment? What does my workload look like right now? Right? So I start with the self. Mm-hmm. Is this something that I want to do and I'm ready to invest the time, energy, and effort into it? If I walk away with a yes, then I think, okay, is the organization ready for that? Right? Is there a way that I can figure out, hey, are there other folks who might be interested in an ERG and who have, the time, energy, right, to invest as well? And would it be something that would be receptive to senior leadership? So you kind of have to do an assessment of all those things: self-assessment, other assessment, organizational assessment. And if they all kind of match, to a certain degree, certain level, right, then you're probably ready to start. Recruit those members to help you formalize the group. People who are energized about it, people who have ideas, people who are ready to engage. And that's where you begin.
Okay. Say we're going to start an ERG. How do we generate that membership that you talked about? You're going to kind of canvas and see who wants to join, but you're still got to get like broader membership. Like you actually have to have a membership for this ERG. And how do you get larger employee support, like organizational support with the regular staff, not just leadership?
So I can tell you my experience. I think it's going to vary from group to group, honestly. But I can tell you my experience and then we'll kind of categorize.
Okay.
So typically there's someone in the organization, perhaps a chief diversity officer, perhaps an HR leader, perhaps someone who can help kind of tap people, find people who might be interested in being a part. Most of it's going to be word of mouth, honestly. Okay. You may want to start from where you are and just say, hey, I know that person. I know this person. Let me just start with them. And then maybe they know people, right? So you got to start with a small group.
Back to the word of mouth, yeah.
Yep. Start with a small group. And then after you've kind of gotten people together, the first things you want to do is like, why are we here? What is it that we hope to achieve? So it's kind of like developing a mission, identifying some goals.
Okay.
2 or 3. You don't have to start with very many. And then that way, when you go out to the broader employee base, you can say, here's what we're about. This is our mission. These are our goals. Are you down for something like this? Would you be interested in something like this? Maybe send out a survey and say, hey, sign up. If this interests you, if you want to be a part of this group, sign up. So you need some way to share with the broader group. So if that's some sort of display, email, newsletter, whatever the case may be, communicating with the broader employee base to say, hey, we're starting something. And then you need to be able to share, this is how we're going to collect information from you so we know who's interested in it, whether that's a sign-up sheet or a survey or something like that.
Well, I guess to kind of circle back on what I said earlier, do you actually need that broader employee support specifically for the folks who might not be interested in joining the ERG? Say it's a ERG for women and, we're talking to our male colleagues.
Absolutely. Because it's in those spaces where they're going to learn something too. Or maybe they're interested in being an ally, right? There's opportunity there.
Okay.
So, yeah, we're always trying to reach across the aisle, right, to folks who don't necessarily identify with the particular characteristic that this group is coming together around.
Yes, let's make that a more common action. So going back to getting started, we got the word out. People are interested. We got the broad base of support, and we got that cache of membership.
Mm-hmm.
What's next?
Well, so then you have to figure out, okay, we want to launch this thing. We've got our members. We've told them what our missions are, what our goals are. Now we need to figure out, okay, what do we want to do with this group, right? So looking at the goals, what are some activities, programs, events that you want to develop around those goals? A lot of times the goals are really easy, right? They're one, opportunity to come together and socialize, a networking opportunity. Two, professional development. And three may be around, recruitment, retention, something like that to help the business. And so figuring out what are some activities around those particular goals makes sense. And then getting those members to help execute, right? Give them something to do. They came together for a reason. Give them something to do. It's always important to have a launch day to bring the group together in that first event, that first meeting, and say, "Oorah, rock on.
The
You're
big
here."
shebang. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
We're here.
Get them excited, right? Tell them, hey, here's the leadership group that's been holding this thing together, launching this thing. But let's figure out if we want to formalize and structure ourselves differently. And then let's move forward. Let's identify some things we want to accomplish.
Okay. Now that the ERG has been launched, you got your membership, you got your leadership team, let's say, and you have some goals, you have your mission, you have some idea of the types of events that you want to host and the general vibe of your ERG. Is there another step, or are we done? That's it. We just go.
No.
Okay. We can't just launch this ship. Okay.
So part of my role as a DE&I director is I advise these ERGs. I partner with them and I collaborate with them to kind of smooth the road to get them to their goals,
That's
right?
nice.
So one of the things we talk about is once you've identified your activities around your goals and your mission that you want to do this year, let's set a calendar of events and activities based on those goals. And I will help them look to see when might be the best time to schedule those, because there are lots of other ERGs, typically, at least in my organization. And there are other things happening in the organization that they need to be aware of, right? So I don't want them to set a time and experience a bump in the road and get discouraged. Let's deal with that and smooth that out on the front end. The next thing is I ask them to promote the ERG internally through available channels, right? So once they've established their calendar, their activities, then let's get the word out, right? And even though they're a group that comes together around a particular affinity or characteristic, I always say, leave it open, invite everyone, right? There's opportunities for engagement, allyship building, educating, awareness, right? So let's invite everybody and promote. So I ask them, kind of set up a communication plan. For this event, what do you want to communicate when? The next thing is, I ask them to track their membership and the engagement. Here's why. It's a very strategic reason. One, it helps them feel good about who's coming to their events, who's participating. But the other thing is, I ask them to think about how they might want to leverage that for other things.
Ooh,
right?
I like it.
So if you can demonstrate
Sneaky strategies.
Exactly. If you can demonstrate, hey, here's the percentage of our membership who participated, but here are the non-members who participated. This is what this tells me. We want to do XYZ because obviously there's a interest level or a demand for it.
We have the data to support that.
Exactly, right? The other thing I think about too is I'm going to use that as a DE&I director, right? To support some of my asks for the future as well. Also looking at if there are members of the group who have emerged as leaders, right? So they have annual reviews, they have stretch assignments. If I can connect that back to them being either a leader or a participant in the ERGs, it's a good thing.
Improvement on their career trajectory.
Absolutely.
Before we take a quick break, I wanted to ask you something that you brought up. You mentioned your work as being a DEI director and how you partner with these ERGs. Is that common? Do ERGs often have access to that sort of executive level leadership like a DEI director?
Well, hopefully, if the organization has a DEI director, but a standard best practice for ERGs is to have an executive sponsor. So that brings me to that last step, right? Making sure that the group has an executive sponsor. An executive sponsor can kind of act as a voice in the room where decisions are being made. They can also help smooth the way at higher levels within the organization. They can also promote what's happening at higher levels in the organization. So having an executive sponsor is really important.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Now we're going to take a quick break, hear from our sponsors, and we'll be right back.
Hi, Barbie here from Moonray, husband and wife indie pop duo. If you enjoy the intro music, we invite you to listen to our debut EP, Honeymoon, streaming now on all platforms. Visit www.moonray-music.com for more.
And we're back talking with Kellie Sauls about ERGs, all things ERGs. I want to know more about executive sponsorship. How do you get one? How do you find one? Is there like a pool that you go fishing in? Like, are there just like executive sponsor, like bus stops at the organization? Like, where do you go to find these people?
A notebook of executive sponsors.
Right? Like, where's the list?
So, a good place to start is to think about who are the executives in the organization and who do you think might be willing to serve as an executive sponsor? A lot of times you don't know until you ask.
What if they're all crusty old white dudes?
That's okay too.
Cool. All right.
Absolutely.
Go get one.
Crusty old white dudes have access to other crusty old white dudes who may be able to support your effort and energy around what you're doing, right? So it's all good. One of the things that I advise our ERGs on is to think outside your particular affinity.
Right.
And that's okay. You want those folks because it signals to other folks like them, this is okay.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing.
The inclusive element.
Absolutely.
Right. Okay. Sorry, crusty white dudes.
We love you, crusty old white dudes.
So
we love
true.
you.
Couldn't be here today without you. All right. Money.
Mm-hmm.
Do ERGs need money? Because I kind of get the feeling that they do. And where does that money come from?
Mm-hmm. It's going to be different for each organization. But I would say, if ERGs are like really doing their stuff, there's probably going to be a need for money. There may be need for money around events, activities, if you want their engagement and recruitment and things like that. There's going to be a little need for money. And the organization, if an organization is really ready, they've already identified where that money is going to come from. So, for example, in my organization, it is very clear we can support ERGs around events that are open to the entire organization and events that promote professional development, right? And that money comes from the DE&I budget.
All right. So me and my brand new ERG just showed up and we don't have a DEI chair. We don't have a diversity officer.
Mm-hmm.
Do I talk to my executive sponsor and be like, how do we get a budget?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes, that is so appropriate. And that's why that planning on the front end is so important. You can sit down with them and say, hey, we've identified our goals. Here are the activities around our goals. Here's where we're going to need some money. We've established a budget. Here's a proposal.
The whole executive sponsor thing just kind of makes me want to just tie everything up back in a nice little bow on company buy-in, organizational buy-in as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
How do you get that? Like we talked about getting your own members. We talked about putting out the word to try to make sure that the message is as inclusive as possible. What else?
So here's something that I've made a part of how I talk about this organization-wide. We have a mission statement for our organization. We have core values for our organization. Everything that I'm doing to support ERGs, I point back to those things. I say, here is how this ERG is supporting the mission of this entire organization. Here is how this ERG activity is supporting our core values. You cannot argue with that. You can't argue with that because every employee, when they accept the employment offer, they basically buy into the mission of the organization and the core values of the organization. And so if they buy into those things and I point back to those things for ERGs, they can't argue with it.
I mean, they could.
They could, but it'd be a little
Bad
bad.
side to be on. All right. Lastly, share some red flags with us on ERGs possibly being misused within an organization. You know, what can we as members of an ERG look out for, and how can we course correct our ERG when we kind of, you know, go the wrong direction? Maybe not intentionally, or maybe there's some ill use there.
I always say, be careful, especially to the leaders, those who emerge as leaders of the ERG. Be careful. You're going to be visible, you're going to get noticed, and you're going to get tapped a lot. Spread the wealth. Spread the wealth. Protect yourself. Once the ERG starts generating results, right? So those things that we kind of expect to see, the outcomes we'd like to see,
Right.
especially from a company organization standpoint.
Meeting the goals that you have for your
Exactly.
ERG.
The demands will increase because it's working.
The demands on the time.
Yes, the demands on the time, the demands on the energy and output, the demands on the ideas and activities. You know, one of the things that started happening over the past couple of years is ERGs are starting to demand for their leaders comp pay for their work and involvement in ERGs because it's on top of their core responsibilities.
Yeah. It's an extra job. Like you got a second job.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I think that's a trend in the right direction. Although TRS has no comment on that.
Copy that. Give us some red flags on ERGs being misused.
Yes. So, increasing demand on the leaders, right? So time, asking for more time for them to do things outside of their core responsibilities.
Okay.
Right? So they got to manage that.
Set boundaries.
Absolutely. It's smart to include ERGs in recruitment strategies, but they have to come with financial support, right? So if I'm saying, hey, can you come to this recruitment event on, Friday evening, right? And it requires parking, it requires gas, or maybe even a flight. That needs to come with financial support. Absolutely 100%.
Okay, excellent. Well, for those of us who are hearing this talk about ERGs and maybe we don't have one within our organization and we want to continue on this learning journey, give us some resources to follow up on this and to keep moving this idea forward.
Absolutely. So one of my favorite resources is through an organization called Pep Talker. And it's spelled TALKHER.
All right.
Yes.
You're talking our language.
I like it. So the Pep Talker organization is a great resource for women in professional spaces. And they did a great job generating and publishing an ERG startup guide. And I used it heavily in supporting the ERGs that wanted to start it at my organization. Great tool, great resource. So Pep Talker, TALKHER.
We'll be sure to link it in the show notes.
Thank you.
Got any more?
Yep. So the Center for Global Inclusion has produced a benchmarks guide, and I use that to help start the diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts where I work. And it really kind of helps set what should be happening at each stage. It's like an assessment and then a stage of development for an organization. And there's a section of those benchmarks dedicated to ERGs and other committees and things like that develop at the organization.
Nice.
Yep. And how the organization can support. And then finally, there's a wonderful consultant. Her name is Jennifer Brown, and she has written several books, but one of my favorite books of hers is How to Become an Inclusive Leader.
Okay, I
Yes.
like that.
And so I always recommend that book for executive sponsors, ERG leaders, even leaders who have nothing to do with DE&I, but they want to support DE&I. Everyone can contribute to the culture of an organization by being more inclusive. So as a leader, how do you message that? How do you help generate that? How do you help support that amongst your team?
All right. Well, to wrap our show, we will do as we normally do and talk our Femme fact. All right, this is a weird question, but do you have any sort of like morbid curiosity for famous last words?
Actually, yes. I'd love to know what people think and what they want to say as they're making their transition out.
All right. Well, I got some for you. And I mean last words. So Marie Antoinette famously lost her head. Her famous last words were obviously in French, but translated to English, they said, "Pardon me, I didn't do it on purpose." And she was actually addressing the fact that she stepped on the feet of her executioner as she was walking by, prior to the chop chop. Actress Joan Crawford went out with an entirely different vibe, saying, "Damn it, don't you dare ask God to help me," which was directed towards her very kind housekeeper who had been praying at her bedside. And of course, the courageous American abolitionist Harriet Tubman said, "I go to prepare a place for you." A gracious and reflective conclusion to her lifetime of leadership, caretaking, and activism. Recently, however, I've learned the last words of another historical female activist, although not as well known in the United States. Sophie Scholl's activism against Germany's 20th century Nazi regime and her participation in the White Rose movement are worth hearing. Such a fine, sunny day, and I have to go. What does my death matter if through us, thousands of people are awakened and stirred into action? And stirred into action they were, but I won't spoil that for you just yet. Sophie Magdalena Scholl was born in 1921 in Frauchtenberg, Germany. She was one of 6 children. Beginning in their school years, Sophie and her siblings were participants of the Nazi group, the National Socialist Cult of Youth. And cult is really creepy there, but it was really in the name. Sophie herself belonged to an additional political youth group called the League of German Girls, but that was in German, right? Her siblings were attracted to the ideals of communion promoted by these groups. However, their father was not a fan of their participation and avidly resisted the political agenda pushed by the Nazis at the time. Sophie's father, Robert Scholl, rejected the narrative of Christianity that Nazi Germany had promulgated to justify their white supremacist messages. As a result, Robert held dinner table talks with his kids that invited open and honest conversation around the fallacies within the Nazi regime. This type of open dialogue was definitely prohibited in Germany at the time. Sophie slowly turned against the Nazi regime through a series of events, which included the arrest of her brother and some friends for anti-Nazi expression, her mandatory service in the war, and witnessing firsthand some of the horrors that Nazi soldiers inflicted. All of this pissed Sophie off enough to become a vocal revolutionary, as one does to cope during times of turmoil. After her mandatory service, she attended the University of Munich to study science. There she saw the White Rose Rebellion in action. The White Rose was distributing educational pamphlets that rejected Nazism and advocated for passive resistance. And when she found out that her older brother Hans was behind it all, she definitely wanted in. The White Rose was a very small operation, which included the Scholl sibling duo, Sophie and Hans, along with 3 other students and 1 professor. The White Rose's oppositional operation relied predominantly on the printing of anti-Nazi messages via pamphlets. Though they only printed and distributed a grand total of 6 complete pamphlets throughout the organization's lifetime, those 6 were enough to bear considerable consequences for the Nazi regime. The pamphlets were printed en masse, and the White Rose managed to gain support across a widespread geographical area ranging from Hamburg to Vienna, whose residents furthered the reach by spreading the pamphlets within their own personal networks. Not only did the pamphlets denounce the actions and rhetoric of the Nazi regime, they also incited calls to action via the sabotage of Hitler's war machines and various forms of passive resistance. This specifically was enough to startle authorities to see the White Rose as a legitimate threat, all the while encouraging Sophie to believe that their grassroots efforts were perhaps enough to bring about change. On February 18, 1943, Sophie and Hans were seen throwing copies of the 6th pamphlet off a railing over a main university hall. They were caught by the Gestapo and arrested. The 2 siblings, along with 1 other friend, a gentleman by the name of Christoph Probst, attempted to take all the blame for the White Rose's actions and were executed by guillotine 4 days later. Yeah, guillotine. So her and Marie Antoinette have something in common. Sophie was 21. Hans and Christoph were 24. They received no mention in German newspapers at the time, but were internationally acclaimed for their activism, leaving behind a legacy of bravery which, as Sophie's last words so accurately described, awakened thousands and stirred them to action. By the way, that 6th pamphlet that they had been caught distributing was later smuggled out of Germany to the UK, where it was reprinted and dropped by Allied planes all over Germany 5 months later. So amazing. And Kellie, you have been amazing today. Thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate your time and the expertise you brought to the conversation on ERGs.
I love talking about DE&I stuff, so thank you for having me and giving me the opportunity to do so. So fun.
It was an absolute pleasure. You have been an excellent leader on that topic today. Thank you.
Thank you.
For those of you who'd like to continue the journey with us, I ask you to subscribe or follow or what have you on your given podcast channels and share with a friend. You're welcome to email us, HERdacity@HERdacity.org. And don't worry, all of the amazing resources that Kellie mentioned, as well as my super long email address, will be listed in our show notes. Until next time, don't think too much about your last words. They'll come to you in the moment.